In a remote cabin on Wyoming's forgotten borderlands, where snow muffles all sound, Los Zetas' elite kill team breaches reinforced doors with surgical precision. 6 shadow figures move through darkness, weapons drawn for what should be a simple elimination. Fatal error. The man they hunt isn't just another witness marked for silencing. He's the CIA's former chief interrogator, a psychological warfare specialist who broke the world's deadliest terrorists. While they bring bullets and blades, he weaponized environments long before they arrived. As motion sensors trigger imperceptible changes, the hunters fail to recognize the cabin isn't a hideout. It's a meticulously crafted trap designed by a man who spent decades learning how predators think, move, and break. What follows isn't combat but a masterclass in psychological destruction, as a man who unmade hardened extremists demonstrates why the most dangerous weapon in any room is a prepared mind. The night swallows their... But before we jump back into the video, let us know where you're watching from. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe because I have something really special for you tomorrow. And now, back to the video. The night swallows their approach. 6 figures in tactical gear, frost crystallizing on balaclavas as they converge on the cabin. Their leader, Vega, signals with gloved hands. 2 minutes to breach. Inside, a single lamp burns in the study. Dr. Malcolm Reed sits motionless, eyes closed, listening. Not to sounds, there are none yet, but to vibrations. The warning came 3 hours ago. A kill team dispatched. Now they're here. Reed opens his eyes. 58 years old, lean, with silver-threaded dark hair, and stillness that comes from decades of interrogations where the slightest reaction could cost lives. His fingers trace the worn leather of his chair, a meditative gesture from a man who appears entirely too calm. He reaches beneath his desk, presses a switch. Outside, Vega kneels beside the cabin door, explosive charge in hand. The metal feels cold through his gloves. He's done this 27 times before. Government witnesses, DEA informants, rival cartel lieutenants. Simple work for simple men. This target, just another gringo who talked too much. Pozos, Delgado, East Side, he whispers into his comm. Cruz, Rojas, take west. Fernandez, with me. The confirmations come in whispers. Each man a killer, selected, from Mexico's special forces before the cartels doubled their salaries. Vega attaches the shaped charge to the reinforced door hinge. His breath forms ghosts in the frigid air. This far north, this isolated, no one will hear. No one will come. Just how Los Zetas prefers it. The explosive detonates with a muffled thump. The door falls inward. Inside, Reed doesn't flinch. He rises, crosses to a vintage record player, and sets the needle. The haunting notes of Bach's Cello Suite No. 1 in G major begin to fill the cabin. The first man through the door is Fernandez. Night vision goggles, MP5 submachine gun sweeping methodically. Behind him, Vega enters low, pistol extended. Perfect breach formation. They've done this 100 times. What they don't notice, the floor beneath them has subtly shifted. Pressure plates registering weight, position. The cabin's intelligence system mapping their entry. Fernandez sees Reed standing by the record player, apparently unarmed. Target acquired, he says into his mic. Central room. Reed turns to face them, hands visible. A slight smile creases his weathered face. Gentlemen, he says in flawless Spanish. I've been expecting you. Vega steps forward, weapon aimed. On your knees. Reed tilts his head, studying them like specimens. You made a fundamental error in your approach. You assumed this was a defensive position. His voice drops to a whisper. It's not. Cruz and Rojas radio in from the western approach. Window entry clear. Reed is secured. Vega responds. Finish sweep. Vega turns back to Reed, who hasn't moved. You know why we're here? Of course. Reed nods. Testimony against Alejandro Garza. But I think there's something you should know about this cabin. Vega tightens his finger on the trigger. And what's that? Reed's smile deepens, eyes cold as the Wyoming winter. I designed it specifically for visitors like you. A metallic click echoes from somewhere in the walls. Vega's eyes narrow. What was... The lights extinguish. Complete darkness. The Bach continues playing. A strangled cry comes through the comm, then static from the eastern approach. Pozos! Delgado! Vega hisses, but there's no response. When the lights flicker back on 3 seconds later, Reed is gone. And so is Fernandez, all. That remains is a small card on the floor where Reed stood, written in elegant script. And so it begins. Malcolm Reed's life hadn't always been constructed of traps and contingencies. 20 years earlier, He'd been Professor Reed, a brilliant behavioral psychologist specializing in stress responses and breaking points. His Georgetown office overlooked the Potomac, his research groundbreaking, his marriage to fellow Professor Elena, 14 years strong. Their daughter Sophia was 10, a prodigy with her mother's eyes and her father's analytical mind. That spring morning, Malcolm had kissed Eleanor goodbye, promised to be home for Sophia's piano recital, and headed to lecture on cognitive resistance under duress. He never made it to the classroom. A black SUV intercepted him. Two men in suits explaining that the Director of Central Intelligence needed his insights on a time-sensitive matter of national security. By evening, Malcolm was reviewing interrogation tapes of a captured terrorist, cell leader linked to an imminent attack. By midnight, he'd identified 17 psychological pressure points the agency's interrogators had missed. By dawn, the attack had been thwarted, and Malcolm Reed had been offered a position that didn't officially exist. "Your country needs you," Deputy Director Warren had said. "People with your abilities come along once in a generation." Malcolm had hesitated. "My family will understand the importance of your work." They hadn't. Elena had filed for divorce 14 months later, unable to bear the classified absences, the changes in her husband when he returned. Sophia had grown distant, eventually, refusing to speak to him altogether. It was the price of becoming the CIA's foremost expert in breaking minds to extract information. Malcolm Reed transformed from academic to architect of psychological warfare, mastering the art of dismantling human resistance. His methods were controversial but effective. No torture, no physical harm, just precise psychological pressure, applied with surgical precision. For 18 years, he served in shadows. Terrorists, cartel leaders, spies, they all eventually broke under his methods. Not because he was cruel, but because he understood them better than they understood themselves. He could identify a subject's psychological architecture within minutes, their fears, motivations, self-deceptions. Then he would methodically deconstruct them. Now, 7 years into retirement, Malcolm moved through his Wyoming cabin with practiced efficiency. The last of Fernandez had been secured in the hidden room beneath the north bedroom. 5 Zetas remained. Their confusion and fear were already building, exactly according to plan. Malcolm checked his watch. 3 minutes since the breach. He opened a hidden panel in the wall, revealing 6 monitors. Each displayed a different section of the cabin. On screen 2, Vega and Cruz swept the kitchen, weapons raised, backs to each other. "What the hell happened to Fernandez?" Cruz whispered. Vega's jaw tightened beneath his balaclava. "Stay focused." Malcolm allowed himself a thin smile. He touched a control pad, activated the kitchen sequence. On screen, the temperature in the kitchen dropped 20 degrees in 30 seconds. The men's breath suddenly visible in plumes. "What the—" Cruz began. The lights flickered, then stabilized. At half brightness, through hidden speakers, almost subliminal, came the faint sound of a child crying. Cruz's head snapped toward the noise. "Did you hear that?" Malcolm watched their body language shift. The subtle tells of growing unease. He'd designed this space over 5 patient years, incorporating everything he'd learned about fear responses. Every room contained psychological triggers that could be activated remotely. Every corridor could transform from familiar to disorienting in seconds. His phone vibrated. Text from Sarah Chen, his former colleague at the agency, now Deputy Director of Operations. "Are you secure?" Malcolm typed a response, implementing countermeasures. 5 remaining. Her reply came instantly. "Extraction team 90 minutes out. Too long." By then, this would be finished, one way or another. The cabin had originally been Malcolm's sanctuary after leaving the agency. The place where he tried to rebuild some semblance of a life, to outrun memories of broken minds and the family he'd lost. Then, 3 months ago, the Gaza cartel case had pulled him back in. Alejandro Garza, one of Mexico's most ruthless cartel leaders, had been captured in a joint DEA-Mexican military operation. Malcolm had been called out of retirement for one final assignment: extract everything Garza knew about his organization's structure, operations, and political protection. It had taken 17 days. In the end, Garza had revealed everything, including information that implicated 3 Mexican generals and a US congressman in his operation. Malcolm's testimony was scheduled for next month's closed grand jury proceeding, which explained the kill team currently searching his home. On screen 3, Pozos and Delgado moved through the East Wing, checking closets, sweeping corners. The US hadn't found the hidden doorway in the guest bathroom yet. Malcolm touched another control. The hallway lights between the assassins dimmed slightly, almost imperceptibly. Human perception was fascinating. Slight changes in light, temperature, or sound could create deep, unease without the subject consciously registering why. Malcolm had refined these techniques over decades, learning the precise measurements needed to destabilize even trained operatives. Pozos paused, rubbing the back of his neck, the first signs of the fight-or-flight response activating. "This place feels wrong," he muttered to Delgado. Delgado snorted. "It's just a cabin." "No." Pozos shook his head. "Something else. Like we're being watched." They were, of course. Malcolm studied their movements, categorizing their psychological types. Delgado, rational, dismissive of intuition, likely resistant to atmospheric manipulation. Pozos, more intuitive, already sensing the dimensional distortions Malcolm had built into the East Wing, where walls were subtly angled to create spatial disorientation. Malcolm's finger hovered over another control. Not yet. Timing was crucial in psychological operations. Rush and subjects would recognize the manipulation. Patient escalation was key. His thoughts drifted briefly to Sophia. His daughter would be 30 now. The last time he'd seen her was at Elena's funeral 3 years ago. She'd refused to speak to him, her eyes cold with a lifetime of abandonment. Another casualty of his service. Sometimes, in the darkness of Wyoming nights, Malcolm wondered if any of it had been worth the cost. Focus. No distractions. On screen 1, Rojas entered the study where Malcolm had been sitting minutes earlier. The young assassin examined the chair, the still-playing record. Malcolm observed the man's profile. Early 30s, military bearing, checking corners with methodical precision. Ex-special forces like the others, but something different in his eyes. Less hardened, newer to this work. Malcolm activated the study sequence. The temperature rose 5 degrees. The back recording slowed imperceptibly. A quarter beat. Not enough to consciously notice, but enough to create cognitive dissonance. A subtle scent of gunpowder released through hidden vents. Rojas froze. His training recognized the smell as threat, but his eyes confirmed an empty room. The contradiction created microsecond hesitation. Exactly what Malcolm needed. Through a hidden passage behind the bookcase, Malcolm entered silently. 18 years of field operations had taught him to move without sound. He stood in shadow as Rojas turned slowly, sensing another presence but unable to locate it. "Psychological warfare is largely about contradiction," Malcolm said softly. Rojas spun, weapon raised. Malcolm remained perfectly still. "Your senses tell you one thing. Your training tells you another. The gap between creates hesitation." Rojas fired. The bullet passed through empty air where Malcolm had stood a half-second earlier. From behind Rojas now, Malcolm continued conversationally. "That hesitation compounds, creates stress. Stress impairs cognitive function. Degraded cognition leads to mistakes." Rojas whirled again, eyes wide. "What the fuck?" "Language demonstrates stress escalation," Malcolm noted. "Your heart rate is approximately 145 beats per minute now. Tunnel vision beginning. Fine motor control deteriorating." Rojas fired again. Missed again. Malcolm's voice now came from the hallway. "At 175 beats per minute, complex motor skills collapse entirely." Rojas charged toward the voice, but the hallway was empty. Confusion leads to fear. Fear to panic. Malcolm's voice seemed to come from all directions now, thanks to the cabin's sophisticated sound system. "You've already lost, Mr. Rojas. You just don't know it yet." A clicking sound behind Rojas. He turned to see a small metallic sphere rolling across the floor. Not a grenade. Something else. It released a fine mist. Rojas held his breath, but too late. The compound was already absorbing through his skin. A specialized CIA formulation. Not lethal, but within 30 seconds, his equilibrium would be severely compromised. Malcolm watched from his hidden observation point as Rojas staggered, tried to call for help on his comm, and collapsed. One more down. 4 remained. On the monitors, Malcolm saw Vega ordering the team to converge on the study after losing contact with Rojas. They were adapting, moving in pairs now. Good. Predictable responses made his work easier. Malcolm checked his watch again. 12 minutes since breach. Everything proceeding according to design. The Zetas thought they were hunting him, never realizing they'd entered an environment completely under his control, where every shadow, sound, and sensation could be weaponized against them. He opened another hidden panel, revealing an array of specialized equipment. Time to escalate. The real game was just beginning. Vega crouched in the hallway, fury building behind his disciplined exterior. 2 men down in 15 minutes. This was supposed to be a clean operation. In and out, target. Eliminated, cabin burned to obscure evidence. Instead, they were being picked off by a retired analyst who should have been an easy kill. Cruise with me, he hissed into his comm. Pozos, Delgado, report position. East wing clear, Pozos responded, voice tight. Moving to second floor. Negative, Vega commanded. Converge on central staircase. We move as unit now. Malcolm watched the tactical shift on his monitors with cold appreciation. Vega was adapting, consolidating his forces, a competent leader. In another life, he might have been an excellent field operative. But consolidation played directly into Malcolm's strategy. He touched a sequence on his control pad, initiating cabin-wide protocols. Throughout the structure, imperceptible changes began. Oxygen levels decreasing by 5%, infrasound at 19 Hz. Activating, just below human hearing, but proven to induce anxiety. Temperature fluctuating, unpredictably. Malcolm keyed his microphone. Time to engage directly. Vega. His voice echoed throughout the cabin, coming from everywhere and nowhere. You've lost 2 men. You'll lose the rest. This doesn't need to continue. Vega signaled for his men to hold positions, eyes scanning for speakers. Surrender now, Reed, Vega called out. Maybe we let you die clean. Malcolm smiled thinly. Predictable response. Maintain illusion of control through threat. Standard cartel protocol. Interesting proposal, Malcolm replied, but fundamentally flawed. You assume you still have options. He paused. Tell me, what did Gaza promise you for this? Money? Promotion? Vega's jaw tightened. How did Reed know Gaza had ordered this personally? Let me save you time, Malcolm continued, voice clinically detached. Alejandro Gaza has no intention of rewarding you. You were chosen because you're expendable. Shut up, Vega snapped. But doubt flickered across his face. Malcolm observed the micro-expression with satisfaction. Seed planted. Check your intel. Vega, Malcolm pressed. Why send 6 men for 1 unarmed retiree? Unless, he let the silence stretch uncomfortably. Unless Gaza wanted to ensure none of you returned to ask questions. Cruz glanced at Vega, uncertainty evident. What's he talking about? Malcolm activated a hidden projector. On the wall before them appeared classified documents. Gaza's plea deal with the US government, dated 3 days ago. Gaza turned state's witness 72 hours ago, Malcolm explained. Full immunity in exchange for his testimony against Los Zetas leadership, including operational details on a kill team dispatched to Wyoming. The document wasn't real. A CIA-quality forgery. Malcolm had prepared for precisely this scenario. Psychological warfare was most effective when built on plausible lies that exploited existing doubts. Bullshit, Vega spat, but his eyes lingered on the document. Is it? Malcolm's voice softened. Why else would he send just 6 men after a high-value CIA asset? He knew you'd fail. Your deaths become proof of his commitment to cooperating with authorities. Cruz stared at Vega. Is that true? He's messing with your head, Vega insisted. But the seed of doubt was visibly growing. Their distraction gave Malcolm the opening he needed. He activated the central staircase protocol. Microscopic nozzles in. The ceiling released an aerosolized compound, another CIA specialty, causing disorientation and heightened suggestibility. Through his respirator, Malcolm spoke again. You've been breathing compromised air for the past 8 minutes. Neural pathways already affected. Judgment impaired. The psychological impact was immediate. Delgado tore off his balaclava, gasping. Pozos aimed his weapon at shadows. Team cohesion fracturing, exactly as Malcolm had designed. Vega alone maintained composure, eyes narrowing as he processed the manipulation. Gas! He shouted. Masks on! Too late. The compound was fast-acting, absorption already complete. Malcolm moved to Phase 3. On his command, every light in the cabin extinguished simultaneously. Complete darkness. Only the Bach continued playing. Distorted now, notes stretched to create unsettling dissonance. In the darkness, Malcolm moved silently toward his next position. Unlike his visitors, he knew every inch of this cabin by memory. Every loose floorboard, every concealed passage. The assassins activated tactical flashlights, beams cutting through darkness. Malcolm had anticipated this. He'd positioned specialized, reflective surfaces at precise angles throughout the cabin. Their lights created disorienting patterns, multiplying shadows, generating illusory movement in peripheral vision. There! Delgado shouted, firing at a fleeting shadow. The bullets shattered, a mirror, fragments raining down. Hold fire, Vega commanded, but discipline was unraveling. Malcolm's voice returned, seeming to whisper directly in each man's ear through directional sound technology. Your team is compromised. Vega received private orders. Ask him why Gaza insisted he lead this mission. It was a calculated gamble based on cartel psychology. In organizations built on fear and betrayal, trust was fragile. Malcolm needed only to apply pressure to existing fracture points. Cruz turned to Vega, weapon lowered but not holstered. What? Orders? Don't be stupid, Vega growled. Focus on the target. Then why did Gaza call you privately before we left? Cruz pressed. 20 minutes. Closed door. Malcolm watched the exchange with clinical interest. He hadn't known about any private call. It was a fortunate coincidence that validated his fabrication. Vega's expression hardened. Following the asset now, he said into his comm, deliberately changing subject. Stay tight, but the damage was done. The team's neural chemistry was already compromised by the compound. Their threat perception heightened. Trust diminished. Malcolm had transformed allies into potential threats in their minds. Time to escalate further. He activated the cabin's temperature controls. The central area where the team had gathered plummeted to near freezing within 60 seconds, their breath suddenly visible, crystallizing before them. Simultaneously, hidden speakers emitted the subtle sound of footsteps circling them, technically perfect spatial audio, creating the impression of multiple hostiles surrounding their position. Pozos broke first, firing wildly at the phantom sounds. His bullets splintered wood, shattered glass. Stand down, Vega shouted, but his authority was collapsing. Malcolm observed their deteriorating psychological state with detached interest. Phase 3. Proceeding faster than anticipated. Time to isolate Vega, the only meaningful threat remaining. He keyed a specific sequence. Pneumatic panels in the floor activated beneath Cruz, Pozos, and Delgado, separating them from their leader. Each panel rotated silently, depositing the men into cushioned containment chambers beneath the cabin, non-lethal, but effectively removing them from the equation. Only Vega remained, suddenly alone in the frigid darkness. What the fuck? He whispered, spinning as his team vanished. Malcolm's voice returned, calm as ever. It's just you and me now, Vega. As it should be. Vega fired in the direction of the voice, bullets embedding in empty walls. You're wasting ammunition, Malcolm noted. I designed this space for men far more dangerous than you. For the first time, genuine fear flickered across Vega's face. The realization that he wasn't the hunter after all. He never had been. Vega pressed his back against the wall, controlling his breathing despite the rising panic. 20 years of cartel operations, from Juarez to Tijuana, had taught him to survive impossible situations. But this was different. The cabin itself seemed alive, hunting him. Your heart rate is approximately 160 beats per minute, Malcolm's voice observed clinically. Nearing the threshold where cognitive function significantly degrades, Vega steadied his weapon with both hands. Show yourself. Fascinating request. Malcolm replied, voice emanating from a different location now. Your primary directive was to eliminate me, yet you now want visual confirmation of my presence. Contradictory impulses indicating psychological distress. Vega fired 3 rounds toward the voice. Plaster exploded from the wall. Impulsive discharge of weapon, Malcolm continued, unperturbed. Further evidence of deteriorating tactical judgment. Fury blazed through Vega's veins. This gringo was analyzing him like a lab specimen. He activated his night vision goggles, scanning methodically. The cabin's layout swam into green-tinted focus, but something was wrong. The dimensions seemed impossible. Doorways that should connect to adjacent rooms now opened into spaces that couldn't exist within the cabin's exterior. Footprint. Disorienting, isn't it? Malcolm's voice came from behind now. I redesigned the interior using principles of non-Euclidean architecture, spaces that seem to overlap, corridors that appear to connect, but actually redirect. Vega spun, but again, found nothing. Your team is secure, Malcolm continued. Non-lethal containment. This confrontation need not end in bloodshed. Where are they? Vega demanded. Safe. Unlike the 3 witnesses your team eliminated last month in Arizona. Vega froze. No one was supposed to know about Arizona. The bodies had never been found. Psychological. Profiles suggested you personally executed the woman, Malcolm added. Teresa Mendoza, 34, environmental engineer who discovered cartel waste dumping. Her children watched. Shut up, Vega hissed, genuine emotion cracking through his professional veneer. Interesting, Malcolm noted. Elevated emotional response indicates guilt. Unusual for your psychological profile. The children weren't in your briefing, were they? An unexpected complication. Vega's finger tightened on the trigger. You know nothing. I know you've been having nightmares, waking in cold sweats. The girl was what, 7? The boy younger, A bead of sweat trickled down Vega's temple despite the cold. How could Reed possibly know about the dreams? Malcolm watched Vega's reaction. On the thermal imaging display. Perfect. The assassin's core temperature had spiked, stress hormones flooding his system. Time to apply pressure to the fracture point. Your cartel file indicates no previous hesitation in eliminating witnesses, Malcolm continued. Yet, something about this particular operation disturbed you. The children, perhaps? Or was it Mendoza? Herself? Something in her reminded you of someone. Vega's expression contorted. You're in my head. No, Malcolm corrected gently. I'm simply observing patterns. Your file mentioned a sister, Maria, correct? Disappeared during the Sinaloa conflicts. Similar age to Mendoza. The reaction was immediate. Vega's posture stiffened. Pain flashing across his features. Malcolm had found the wound. Now to press deeper. Maria was why you joined Los Zetas initially. Revenge against Sinaloa. But somewhere along the way, the mission changed. You became what you hated. Enough, Vega roared, firing wildly now. Bullets splintering furniture, shattering glass. Malcolm waited patiently until the magazine emptied, the final shell casing tinkling against hardwood. Feel better? He asked softly. Vega stood breathing heavily, weapon smoking in his trembling hands. Malcolm's voice gentled further. There's another path, Vega. Witness protection. New identity. The nightmares might eventually stop. For one heartbeat, indecision flickered across Vega's face. The briefest opening. Then his features hardened again. I'll find you, he promised, ejecting the spent magazine, slamming a fresh one home. And I'll take my time. Malcolm sighed. He'd hoped to avoid this. He activated the final containment protocol. The floor beneath Vega suddenly liquefied. A specialized polymer, triggered to transform from solid to viscous state. Before he could react, Vega sank to his knees, the material hardening instantly around. His legs, trapped. From a hidden panel in the ceiling, a fine mist descended. Vega struggled briefly, then slumped forward as the sedative took effect. Malcolm emerged from his observation post, approaching the unconscious assassin. He checked Vega's pulse. Strong and steady, the extraction team would find him and his men. Alive, ready for interrogation. He'd meant what he said about witness protection. Even men like Vega deserved a chance at redemption. Malcolm retrieved his satellite phone, prepared to contact Sarah Chen at the CIA. The operation had concluded successfully. Threat neutralized. Before he could dial, a distinctive click echoed from the front entrance. A sound he recognized instantly. The cabin's perimeter breach alert. Someone else had arrived. Malcolm's mind processed the new threat with cold efficiency. The perimeter sensors indicated a single intruder approaching from the south, not the CIA extraction team, who would approach from the east and announce themselves through proper channels. A second kill team? Unlikely. Standard cartel protocol. Demanded waiting for confirmation of success or failure before deploying backup. Malcolm moved silently to the security console, activating exterior cameras. The monitor displayed a single figure trudging through snow. Female, mid-30s, no visible weapons. Civilian clothing inappropriate for the weather conditions. Recognition hit like physical impact. Sophia, his daughter. Impossible. She hadn't spoken to him in years, had explicitly stated at Elena's funeral that she wanted nothing more to do with him. Yet there she was, her features unmistakable, even through the camera's grainy night vision filter. For the first time that night, Malcolm felt genuine fear. The cabin was still an active containment zone. 5 unconscious cartel assassins, aerosolized, compounds lingering in certain sectors, and triggered traps that hadn't reset. He grabbed his coat, rushing toward the entrance, all professional detachment abandoned. Paternal instinct, overriding tactical considerations. Outside, the Wyoming winter hit with brutal force. 20 degrees below freezing, wind cutting like knives. Sophia struggled forward, arms wrapped around herself, clearly underdressed for the conditions. Sophia, Malcolm called, wading through knee-deep snow. What are you doing here? She looked up, her mother's eyes in a face hardened beyond its years. Hello, father, the formal address, cold as the surrounding air. You shouldn't be here, he said, reaching her, fighting the urge to embrace her. It's not safe, I tried calling. Her voice remained emotionless. For 3 days, guilt stabbed through him. He'd disconnected communications while preparing for the Zetas' arrival. I was handling a situation. You're always handling a situation. She cut him off. But this is different. It's about Mum. Malcolm froze. Elena? What about her? The anniversary of her death is tomorrow. Sophia's voice finally cracked. I found something in her papers. Something about you. About why she really left. Malcolm felt the world slow around him. 3 years since Eleanor's passing, and still her absence ached like an unhealed wound. "We need to get inside," he said, professional instincts reasserting. "Then we can talk. No more delays," Sophia insisted. "No more excuses." Before Malcolm could respond, headlights appeared on the distant access road, multiple vehicles approaching. Rapidly, his tactical mind processed possibilities in microseconds. Too soon for the CIA extraction team. Wrong direction for local authorities. The timing too convenient with Sophia's unexpected arrival. A terrible suspicion formed. "Sophia," he asked carefully, "how did you find this place? I never gave you the address." Something shifted in her expression. Guilt, perhaps, or fear. "A man called me," she admitted. "Said he was your colleague. Said you were in danger. Gave me this location." Malcolm's blood ran cold. "What was his name?" he said. "Garza. Alejandro Garza." The trap crystallized with perfect clarity. Garza hadn't just sent assassins. He'd identified Malcolm's one blind spot. The own person whose safety would make him abandon all protocols. All caution. His daughter. "We need to move," Malcolm said, grabbing Sophia's arm. "Now." "What's happening?" Fear finally penetrated her anger. "You were followed," he explained, pulling her toward the cabin. "Used as bait." The approaching vehicles accelerated, headlights bouncing through the trees. Malcolm estimated 3 minutes before arrival. Not enough time to secure Sophia and reset the cabin's defenses. For the first time in decades, Dr. Malcolm Reed, the CIA's preeminent psychological warfare specialist, felt unprepared. Inside the cabin, Malcolm's mind raced through dwindling options. The unconscious Zetas remained secured in the containment chambers, Vega immobilized in the hardened polymer. The cabin's defensive systems needed 30 minutes to reset after the comprehensive deployment he'd initiated. And now, a second wave was coming, using his daughter as an unwitting lure. "Dad, what's going on?" Sophia demanded, the childhood name slipping out unconsciously. Malcolm accessed the security feeds. 3 black SUVs, approaching fast. Professional configuration, not cartel soldiers this time, but something worse. Private, military contractors. 8 figures visible. Advanced tactical gear. "The short version?" he said, moving to a hidden wall panel. "I testified against a cartel leader named Alejandro Garza. Now he's trying to silence me before the grand jury hearing." "Jesus," Sophia whispered. "And I led them straight to you." "Not your fault," Malcolm assured her, entering a complex sequence into the hidden keypad. The wall slid open, revealing an arsenal of specialized equipment. "You were manipulated by professionals." "Like you," she said, the old bitterness returning. Malcolm paused, looking at her directly. "Yes, like me." No denial, no justification. The simple acknowledgement seemed to surprise her. "We have approximately 2 minutes," he continued, selecting equipment. "There's a panic room beneath the east wing. Fully stocked, separate ventilation, communications array. You want me to hide while you what? Take on professional killers alone? I want you safe." He handed her a small device. "Emergency beacon. Activates automatically when you enter the panic room. CIA response team redirects here immediately." Sophia stared at the device, then at her father. 20 years of resentment, battled with the immediate reality of danger. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked finally. Malcolm hesitated. Even now, the professional in him calculated what information to withhold. "Dad," she pressed. "Whole truth. The first team was a test," he admitted. "Expendable assets to evaluate my defenses. This second group will be different. Better equipped. Specifically briefed on my methods." He paused. "Lower survival probability. You mean yours?" He nodded once. Sophia's expression hardened. Eleanor's determination in her features. "Then I'm staying." "Absolutely not. I'm not asking permission," she countered. "I spent 20 years hating you for choosing strangers over family. I won't let you die alone just when I'm finally starting to understand why you did it." Malcolm recognized the immovable resolution in her stance. Elena had worn the same expression when arguing theoretical psychology with him during their marriage, a formidable opponent even then. Before he could respond, the security monitors showed the vehicles stopping 100 yards from the cabin. Tactical, teams deploying with practiced precision, military efficiency. "If you stay," Malcolm said, "decision made. You follow my instructions exactly. No questions, no hesitation." Sophia nodded. "Your mother would be furious with both of us right now," he added, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. For the first time in years, Sophia smiled back. Brief, but genuine. "She always said your stubbornness would get you killed someday." Our stubbornness, Malcolm corrected, handing her a specialized vest. Put this on. Outside, the tactical team formed a perfect perimeter around the cabin. Their commander raised a bullhorn. Dr. Reed, a voice called through the night. This is your one opportunity for surrender. The woman leaves unharmed. You come with us. Decision time, 60 seconds. Malcolm checked his watch. The CIA extraction team was still at least 40 minutes out. No reinforcements coming. He turned to Sophia, his expression softening momentarily. Whatever happens next, I need you to know something. Leaving you and your mother was the worst mistake of my life. Not a day passed that I didn't regret it. Sophia's eyes widened at the unexpected confession. But, Malcolm continued, professional resolve returning. What I learned doing that work might just keep us alive tonight. He moved to the control console, initiating emergency protocols. Throughout the cabin, specialized systems engaged. The last line of defense. The commander's voice echoed again. 30 seconds, Dr. Reed. Malcolm turned to his daughter, features set with grim determination. Ready? Sophia straightened, nodding once. Then let's rewrite their operational parameters, he said, using the technical language that had defined his career. Then, seeing her confusion, he translated. Let's show them they brought the wrong kind of weapons to this fight. Outside, the tactical team finished final preparations, unaware they were about to confront not just one psychological warfare specialist, but 2 generations of analytical brilliance. The true game was about to begin. Final warning, Dr. Reed. The commander's voice carried through the frigid air. Surrender now, or we breach! Malcolm made final adjustments to the cabin's systems, movements swift and precise. They'll come through multiple entry points simultaneously, he explained to Sophia. Standard tactical approach for a structure this size. Sophia watched her father work, seeing him truly for the first time. Not as the absent parent who'd chosen country over family, but as the professional he'd become. His focus absolute, hands steady, despite the imminent threat. What exactly is your plan? She asked. Psychological warfare isn't about inflicting harm, Malcolm explained, activating a sequence of controls. It's about creating an environment where the adversary's mind becomes their primary obstacle. Outside, the tactical team finished their final preparations. Their commander, Mason Briggs, checked his watch. 60 seconds elapsed. No response from the cabin. Execute breach protocol, he ordered into his comm. 8 operatives moved with synchronized precision. 2 teams of 4 approaching from east and west. Unlike the Cartel assassins, these men wore advanced tactical gear, including audio-dampening headsets, specialized vision enhancement, and environmental protection suits. Garza's instructions had been explicit. Reed's psychological tactics were to be neutralized through technological countermeasures. No chances taken with a man who had broken the world's most hardened terrorists. Inside, Malcolm watched their approach on the monitors. They've come prepared, he noted with professional appreciation. Audio dampening to counter sonic manipulation. Filtered respiration to prevent chemical exposure, likely running modified perception software to counter visual distortions. So your tricks won't work, Sophia concluded. My obvious tricks won't work, Malcolm corrected. But they've made a fundamental error in their approach. Which is, they're still thinking tactically, not psychologically. He turned to her. They've prepared for the methods in my CIA file. Standard protocols I developed for military application. Understanding dawned in Sophia's eyes. But not what you've developed since. Malcolm nodded, a hint of pride in his expression. Exactly. He accessed a hidden compartment, removing what appeared to be a simple metallic sphere. This cabin isn't just my home. It's been my laboratory for the past 7 years. The techniques I've refined here go beyond anything in official records. Outside, the breach team reached position. Explosive charges placed on reinforced entry points. Countdown initiated. 5 seconds to breach, the team leader reported. 4, 3. Inside, Malcolm placed the metallic sphere in the center of the room, activating it with a precise sequence. Cover your ears, he instructed Sophia. Close your eyes. Count to 10. The charges detonated simultaneously. Reinforced doors and windows blew inward in perfectly orchestrated chaos. Tactical teams flooded through the openings, weapons raised, moving in practiced formation, and found themselves suddenly unable to move. The metallic sphere had activated, releasing a specialized field that interacted with the electronic components in their advanced gear, not disabling them, something far more subtle. Every electronic signal now transmitted with a 4 millisecond delay, 4 milliseconds, an imperceptible interval to conscious awareness, but to the brain's proprioceptive systems, theme mechanisms that coordinate movement through space. The delay created profound disorientation. Their bodies appeared to respond normally, but their perceptual systems registered everything slightly out of sync. The result? Instant, debilitating vertigo. 4 operatives immediately collapsed, inner ear function compromised. 3 more staggered against walls, desperately trying to maintain balance. Only their commander, Briggs, remained standing, older equipment lacking the vulnerable components. "Masks off!" he shouted, recognizing something was wrong with their gear. "Switch to backup systems!" Too late. Malcolm's second countermeasure, activated. Targeted electromagnetic pulses disabling their backup systems. One by one, their specialized equipment failed. "Move to phase 2, Malcolm instructed Sophia, who watched with a mixture of horror and fascination. She nodded, following his earlier instructions. She accessed the cabin's ventilation controls, initiating a specialized sequence. Throughout the structure, carefully calibrated atmospheric adjustments began. Oxygen levels, barometric pressure, ambient temperature all shifting in precise patterns. Not dangerous levels, but disorienting ones. The human body registered the changes subconsciously, triggering low-level anxiety responses without clear cause. Malcolm approached the struggling tactical team, hands raised non-threateningly. "Your equipment has been temporarily disabled," he announced. "No permanent damage to your team or systems. I'm offering peaceful resolution." Briggs raised his sidearm, the only one still capable of coordinated movement. "Stand down, Reed. Consider your position," Malcolm continued calmly. "Your team is incapacitated. Your communications are jammed. And you haven't evaluated the status of the previous team sent to eliminate me." Doubt flickered across Briggs's face. "Check the East Wing," Malcolm suggested. "You'll find 6 Los Zetas operatives contained but unharmed." "I don't kill when unnecessary." "Bullshit," Briggs spat. "You're CIA's interrogation specialist. Everyone knows what that means." "You've been misinformed," Malcolm replied. "My methods never involved physical harm. Ask yourself, why would Gaza send a second team if the first succeeded? Why not verify, before deploying additional resources?" The tactical logic registered with the commander, professional doubt creeping in. "You've been manipulated," Malcolm pressed. "Tactical operators like yourself are valuable assets, not expendable. Yet Gaza deployed you without full intelligence on the situation. Ask yourself why." Briggs's weapon remained steady, but his expression showed the first cracks of uncertainty. "We have orders," he stated, but with diminished conviction. "I understand." "Orders," Malcolm nodded. "I also understand being set up for failure. Your team was sent without crucial intelligence about this location, about my capabilities." Behind Malcolm, Sophia watched the psychological dismantling with newfound respect. Her father wasn't using force or threats, just precisely targeted truth that exploited existing doubts. "Stand down," Malcolm repeated. "No one needs to die tonight." For a moment, resolution seemed possible. Briggs' weapon lowered slightly. Then everything changed. A single gunshot echoed from the cabin's entrance. Malcolm staggered forward, shock registering on his face. A crimson stain spread across his shoulder. Behind him stood Sophia, holding a pistol she'd retrieved from a fallen operative. Her expression had transformed completely, cold, professional, entirely unlike the daughter who'd arrived minutes earlier. "Enough games," she said, her voice suddenly accented. "Colombian, not American. You talk too much, Dr. Reed." Malcolm clutched his bleeding shoulder, mind racing to process the impossible. "Sophia?" "Sophia Reed died 3 months ago," the woman replied coolly. "Car accident outside Bogota." Convenient timing. The revelation hit Malcolm with greater force than the bullet. "Who are you?" "Carmen Vasquez," she replied. "Gaza's psychological warfare specialist. Your professional counterpart, you might say." The pieces aligned with terrible clarity. Malcolm had been monitoring his daughter from a distance for years. Career developments, occasional social media presence. But he'd respected her wish for separation, never directly contacting her. The perfect blind spot. "The physical resemblance is remarkable, isn't it?" Carmen continued, circling him as the tactical team recovered. Surgical adjustments helped, of course. Voice modulation. Intensive study of her mannerisms, her history. Malcolm's tactical mind reassessed everything. The too convenient arrival. The emotional manipulation that had clouded his judgment. His one vulnerability exposed and expertly exploited. How? He managed. Professional detachment battling paternal anguish. Sophia's medical records, personal history, were accessible once we had cooperation from someone in your former agency, Carmen explained. "Someone who believes your testimony will expose operations better left buried." The betrayal crystallized. Sarah Chen. Carmen smiled, Sophia's smile on a stranger's consciousness. Deputy Director Chen sends her regards. She was most helpful with your psychological profile. The tactical team had recovered now, surrounding Malcolm with weapons drawn. Briggs approached with handcuffs. You see, Dr. Reed, Carmen continued, you taught the intelligence community that everyone has pressure points, psychological vulnerabilities that, when properly leveraged, make resistance impossible. She gestured to her face. Yours was remarkably straightforward. Family. The daughter you lost through your own choices. Malcolm's expression remained impassive, but his mind worked furiously, reassessing, adapting. They'd beaten him, this own game, exploiting his deepest vulnerability with surgical precision. What happened to the real Zetas team? He asked. Buying time, mind-calculating escape vectors. Eliminated after providing useful intelligence on your defenses, Carmen replied. Gaza doesn't tolerate failure. As Briggs secured the handcuffs, Malcolm locked eyes with the woman wearing his daughter's face. One question, is Sophia truly dead? Something flickered in Carmen's expression. A micro-expression too brief to consciously register, but that Malcolm's trained eye caught instantly. Uncertainty. She was lying. Sophia was alive. That single realization changed everything. If his daughter lived, then Carmen's psychological leverage was compromised. And if there was one thing Malcolm Reed understood, it was how quickly psychological advantage could shift. Take him, Carmen ordered. Gaza wants him alive for questioning. The tactical team led Malcolm toward the exit. New determination hardened within him. They had beaten him using his own methods, exploiting emotional vulnerability to compromise tactical judgment. Now he would show them why he had been the CIA's foremost psychological warfare specialist for 18 years. The real game was just beginning. The convoy of black SUVs cut through the Wyoming night, headlights illuminating endless snowfields. Inside the lead vehicle, Malcolm sat handcuffed, shoulder wound hastily bandaged. Blood had soaked through, the pain sharp but clarifying. Across from him, Carmen watched with clinical interest, still wearing his daughter's face, a psychological weapon aimed directly at his heart. You're wondering about your tactical options, she observed. Calculating probabilities, looking for weaknesses in our security protocols. Malcolm remained silent. She was attempting to establish psychological dominance through demonstrated insight, a technique he'd pioneered. Your silence is also strategic, Carmen continued. Refusing engagement to maintain autonomy. Another technique from your CIA playbook. Again, Malcolm offered nothing. Let her believe her analysis was accurate. Psychological warfare operated on multiple levels, the obvious and the unseen. Carmen leaned forward. I studied your work extensively, your papers on stress-induced cognitive deterioration, your classified reports on neural pathway manipulation under duress. Brilliant innovations. Her expression shifted to something resembling genuine admiration. You revolutionized the field. To what end? Malcolm finally asked, voice even despite the pain. Gaza will kill me regardless of what intelligence you extract. Perhaps, Carmen agreed. But your methodologies will survive, refined, improved upon. Malcolm noted the professional pride in her tone. Not just an operative, a true believer. In the science, that was useful information. You have questions, he observed, about techniques not in the official records. Interest flickered in her eyes, professional curiosity, her vulnerability. Before she could respond, the SUV swerved violently. The driver shouted something in Spanish, braking hard. Through the windshield, Malcolm glimpsed a fallen tree blocking the narrow mountain road. Check it, ordered Briggs from the front passenger seat. Two operatives exited, approaching the obstacle with weapons ready. Malcolm assessed the situation with cold precision. Standard roadblock, likely natural given the recent storms, but the tactical team would treat it as a potential ambush, the perfect moment for counteraction. While attention focused forward, Malcolm dislocated his right thumb with a practiced movement, an escape technique taught in advanced CIA field training. Pain flared, but the cuffs now had sufficient space to slip free if necessary. Not yet, though. Timing remained crucial. The operatives returned. Roads blocked. Need 10 minutes to clear it. Briggs consulted his GPS. No alternate route. We clear it and move on. As the team deployed to remove the tree, Malcolm initiated his psychological counteroffensive. Your security profile indicates CIA training, he said to Carmen. Langley, approximately 7 years ago. Under Thompson. Surprise registered briefly on her features. How did you... Micro-gestures. Operational protocols. Thompson's trainees have distinctive technical patterns. All fabrication, but delivered. with absolute conviction. What turned you? Money? Ideology? Carmen's expression hardened. You're attempting to establish false familiarity, building psychological rapport through implied shared history. Am I? Malcolm allowed a hint of amusement. Or have I already identified your operational background from observable cues, suggesting I understand more about your organization than you've accounted for? Doubt flickered. Exactly what Malcolm intended. The seed of uncertainty, carefully planted. Your team's tactical formation upon breach, he continued, used modified Langley protocols. Only 3 field units received that training. Your specialist with the Austrian manufactured equipment? Left-handed configuration, rare modification, only approved for certain CIA operations. All invented details, but presented with such specific conviction that disbelief became difficult. The human mind struggled to dismiss highly specific falsehoods delivered with certainty. You're creating fiction, Carmen said. But her tone had shifted subtly. Your files suggested higher cognitive resilience, Malcolm replied with disappointment. I assumed you'd recognize the security implications if I've identified your operational origins. Carmen glanced toward Briggs, momentary concern crossing her features. The psychological structure was building. False but compelling narrative that she'd been identified as former CIA, potentially compromising their entire operation. Outside, the team struggled with the fallen tree. Malcolm noted their positions, the distribution of weapons, the sightlines from each vehicle. Environmental assessment, another CIA discipline. Interesting attempt, Carmen said, recovering her composure. But psychological manipulation requires belief in the constructed narrative. I know my background. Your fabrications won't work. Malcolm smiled slightly. The objective wasn't to make you believe a false background. It was to make you defensive about your real one. Carmen stiffened imperceptibly. Your reaction time to specific terminology. Your subliminal eye movements when I mentioned certain organizations. You've revealed more in denial than I could have learned through confirmation. Now genuine concern registered. Malcolm was reversing her psychological approach, using her responses to construct a profile rather than directly extracting information. Before she could counter, Briggs called from outside. Road's clear. Mount. Up! The brief interruption provided Malcolm the opening he needed. With practiced precision, he slipped one hand free from the loosened cuffs, simultaneously reaching beneath the seat with his boot. Every capture scenario included a moment of supreme vulnerability, the transition point when prisoners were moved between secure locations. Malcolm had spent decades studying these inflection points. Now he would exploit one. Carmen's eyes widened as she registered the movement. He's too late. Malcolm's fingers found what he sought. The emergency flashlight magnetically attached beneath each tactical vehicle's seats. Standard equipment, standard position. In one fluid motion, he activated it at maximum setting. 3,000 lumens directed straight into Carmen's light-adjusted eyes. Temporary blindness. 3-second advantage. Sufficient. The next 7 seconds unfolded. With methodical precision, Malcolm drove the edge of his hand into Carmen's trachea. Restricted airflow. Non-lethal, but temporarily incapacitating. With his other hand, he seized her sidearm, reversed position, and placed her unconscious form between himself and the vehicle's entrance as a shield. Outside, Briggs registered the commotion, drawing his weapon. Reeds loose. Secure the... Malcolm fired 3 rounds through the SUV's front tire. Not aiming for personnel. Unnecessary casualties complicated extraction scenarios. The vehicle listed sharply to one side. Operatives converged from all directions. Malcolm calculated trajectories, coverage angles, response times. 8 hostiles, all armed, trained for exactly this scenario. Direct confrontation, suicide, psychological, advantage needed. He kept Carmen's unconscious form positioned as shield while retrieving her comm unit. Tactical teams relied on communication integrity. Disrupt that, and coordination fractured. Hostiles approaching from forest line, he shouted. Into the comm. Perfect imitation of Briggs' cadence and speech patterns. Unknown number. Cover west perimeter. Confusion erupted. 3 operators immediately pivoted toward the tree line, instinctively responding to what they believed was their commander's voice. Malcolm used the momentary disorder to exit the vehicle. On the opposite side, staying low, using the SUV's bulk forecover, 2 more operatives remained at the roadblock, still unaware of the situation. Second team compromised, Malcolm continued through the comm. Possible insider. Authentication protocols initiated. Chaos multiplied. Authentication protocols, the prescribed response to suspected communication infiltration, required radio silence until command validation. 3 more operatives hesitated, uncertain whether to maintain position or investigate the vehicle. Only Briggs understood what was happening. Compromised, he shouted. Reed has psychological. Malcolm fired a single round into the vehicle's gas tank. Not to ignite. Modern fuel systems rarely exploded outside of movies, but to create the immediate association of danger, psychological shorthand for imminent threat. The desired response followed. Tactical personnel scattered for cover, momentarily prioritizing self-preservation over mission parameters. 7 seconds of advantage. Malcolm moved with practiced efficiency, slipping into the tree line, while the team remained fragmented and reactive. From the darkness, he watched their confusion transform into coordinated response. Briggs, re-establishing command, positions secured, search patterns initiated, professional recovery. But Malcolm had gained what he needed most: distance and time. He moved deeper into the forest, tactical mine processing options. The bullet wound complicated matters. Blood loss would become critical within hours. Temperature dropping rapidly, exposure risk severe. Nearest civilization approximately 17 miles east. But these were merely physical challenges. The psychological dimension had shifted fundamentally. Carmen's micro-expression had confirmed his daughter lived. Sophia was alive, likely held as leverage. Every psychological warfare specialist understood the value of living collateral. Dead hostages, lost motivational power. Malcolm checked the stolen sidearm, Sig Sauer, 3/4 magazine remaining, limited utility against a tactical team, but sufficient for wildlife defense. More importantly, he'd acquired Carmen's phone during the extraction. Tactical teams use specialized communication protocols, but personal devices often contained exploitable intelligence. The phone was locked, but Malcolm had spent decades understanding how humans created and stored access credentials. Most security specialists used complex passwords, but relied on secondary authentication methods with exploitable weaknesses. Carmen's phone used facial recognition, problematic without her presence, but secondary authentication typically involved knowledge-based verification. Security questions, personal information. Malcolm examined the device carefully. 3 failed attempts would trigger security protocols. 1 attempt available. He considered Carmen's psychological profile, specialist in his methodologies, professional pride evident, operative identity likely built around that expertise. On the lock screen, he selected Forgot Password. The security question appeared. First subject successfully interrogated. Malcolm smiled grimly. Professional narcissism, defining her security around career milestones. But which subject? He considered her background, Colombian accent, Gaza connection, timeline of known cartel psychological operations. 7 years ago, DEA Operation Kingsnake had captured high-ranking Gaza Lieutenant Miguel Cordero. Cordero had unexpectedly cooperated, providing unprecedented intelligence. The official report cited standard interrogation protocols, but Malcolm had suspected advanced psychological techniques applied by someone with specialized training. Carmen's professional origin point. Malcolm entered. Miguel Cordero. The phone unlocked. He worked quickly, assessing the device's contents while moving steadily eastward. Distant shouts indicated the search perimeter expanding. Briggs would have ordered thermal imaging by now. Time constraints tightening. The phone contained the expected communications, coordinates, operational parameters. But in the photo gallery, Malcolm found something unexpected. A surveillance image of Sophia, his actual daughter, dated 3 days earlier. She appeared unconscious in a medical facility of some kind. Location metadata stripped, but visible details provided context clues. Medical equipment with Spanish labeling, architectural elements consistent with high-end Mexican private clinics. The confirmation sent cold rage through Malcolm's veins. Not the hot, unfocused anger that clouded judgment, but thesis precision of absolute purpose. They had taken his daughter, used her as bait, created a psychological double to exploit his deepest vulnerability. Now they would learn why the CIA's file on Dr. Malcolm Reed contained an unusual warning. Subject demonstrates unparalleled capacity for strategic adaptation when personally targeted. Direct confrontation not recommended under any circumstances. From the forest, Malcolm watched the tactical team's searchlights combing the darkness. Briggs had organized an efficient search pattern, contracting methodically. Professional, thorough, completely insufficient against what was coming. Malcolm Reed had spent his career understanding how humans broke under pressure. Now he would demonstrate what happened when a psychological warfare specialist was given the one thing more dangerous than training, resources, or tactical advantage: a reason to win at any cost. Dawn broke over the Wyoming wilderness, pale light, filtering through snow-laden branches. Malcolm had covered 8 miles through the night, moving with ruthless efficiency despite blood loss and plunging temperatures. Tactical pursuits relied on predictable patterns, direct routes to civilization, seeking immediate medical attention, contacting authorities. Malcolm had done none of these. Instead, he doubled back toward the cabin. He crouched now on a ridge overlooking the property. Through stolen binoculars, he observed the tactical team's remaining personnel securing the perimeter. 4 operatives visible, standard containment protocol. They would maintain position until extraction, preserving the scene for intelligence value. Malcolm's tactical analysis was automatic. 2-man teams, rotating patterns, communication checks every 15 minutes. Predictable, because proven effective. Also exploitable for precisely that reason. The cabin itself remained his primary objective, not for shelter or supplies, but for something far more valuable. The comprehensive backup systems hidden beneath the East Wing, specialized equipment, communication arrays, medical supplies, and most importantly, his contingency operations package. No psychological warfare specialist survived 18 years in the field without preparing for personal targeting. Malcolm had maintained extensive countermeasures for precisely this scenario. The tactical challenge, bypassing 4 trained operatives with superior weaponry while wounded and resource limited. The psychological solution, transform their operational parameters. Malcolm checked Carmen's phone again. The search teams had maintained disciplined communications. Security but automated systems still generated data. Location tracking showed Briggs and the main force continuing northeast, logically pursuing what they believed was Malcolm's escape route towards civilization. However, Carmen's personal communications revealed something more valuable. Text exchanges, with an unknown contact discussing package transport scheduled for 0900 hours. Medical protocols referenced, location coordinates approximately 60 miles south. Sophia's planned relocation. Malcolm checked his watch, 0717 hours. Time constraints narrowing. He studied the cabin's perimeter again. Direct approach remained suicidal. But psychological warfare operated through indirect vectors. Malcolm had designed the cabin's security systems himself, including remote access protocols. The stolen phone offered connectivity. If Malcolm could access the cabin's secondary systems without alerting the occupying force, he retreated to a sheltered position, fingers moving rapidly over the device despite the cold. Carmen's credentials provided partial access to external networks. From there, Malcolm navigated through backdoor protocols he'd established years earlier. Digital pathways known only to him. Connection established. Limited functionality, but sufficient. Malcolm could now access portions of the cabin's integrated systems. Not enough for comprehensive control, but enough for targeted disruption. He initiated the first sequence. Water pressure fluctuations in the cabin's west wing. Minor, seemingly mechanical issue. Standard response would dispatch 1 operative to investigate, reducing effective security by 25%. Through the binoculars, Malcolm observed the expected result. Brief communication between personnel, then a single operative, entering the cabin. 3 remained outside. Phase 2. Localized power fluctuation in external security lighting. Another apparent mechanical failure requiring inspection. Malcolm watched as another operative moved to the electrical junction box on the north side. 2 external, 2 internal. Force divided. Malcolm moved quickly down the ridge, approaching from the blind spot he deliberately built into the cabins. Security perimeter, a narrow ravine that thermal imaging struggled to penetrate due to natural geothermal activity beneath. The first operative never registered Malcolm's approach. Pressure point strike to the carotid sinus, unconsciousness in 4 seconds. No permanent damage. Malcolm secured the man with his own restraints, appropriating his comm unit and sidearm. 1 down. The second proved more challenging. Alert, properly positioned with good sightlines. Malcolm couldn't approach undetected. Instead, he activated the next cabin sequence, emergency protocols in the East Wing. Alarm indicators would show potential containment breach of the secured Zetas operatives. The distraction worked. Both remaining external guards converged on the east entrance, prioritizing prisoner security over perimeter control. Malcolm used their temporary focus to approach the south entrance, a maintenance access point concealed beneath the deck structure. Inside, Malcolm navigated through service corridors he'd built specifically for this purpose. Pathways absent from any blueprint, invisible to standard tactical assessment. He reached the hidden elevator to the sub-level facilities without encountering resistance. The elevator required biometric authorization. Malcolm placed his palm on the scanner, ignoring the pain as the system sampled blood for DNA verification. Backup power engaged, doors opening silently. Deep beneath the cabin, Malcolm's contingency center hummed with auxiliary power. Untouched by the intruders, Hall remained unaware of its existence. Here, he'd prepared for scenarios ranging from natural disasters to targeted operations exactly like the one currently unfolding. Medical supplies first. Malcolm removed his makeshift bandage, properly cleaning and dressing the bullet wound. No major arterial damage, but significant blood loss. He administered antibiotics in a synthetic hemoglobin compound, classified CIA medical technology that accelerated red blood cell production. Next, communications. The facility contained a secure satellite uplink independent of commercial networks. Malcolm considered contacting former CIA colleagues, but dismissed the option immediately. Sarah Chen's betrayal suggested broader compromise within the agency. Instead, he accessed classified databases using emergency overrides he'd preserved from his service. The codes would trigger security alerts, but provided approximately 12 minutes of access before countermeasures engaged. Malcolm worked with practiced efficiency, extracting everything available on Carmen Vasquez, Alejandro Garza's recent operations, and most importantly, facilities matching the visual indicators from Sophia's surveillance photo. The intelligence confirmed his analysis. Sophia was being held at a private medical facility outside Guadalajara, a property connected to Garza's network through shell corporations. Security parameters indicated a defensive force of approximately 20 personnel with standard cartel armaments. Formidable, but not insurmountable with proper preparation. Malcolm accessed the facility's final resource, the armory, not conventional. Weapons, which offered limited utility against numerically superior forces. Instead, specialized equipment designed for psychological operations. Tools that transformed perception, altered decision-making capacity, and created exploitable cognitive vulnerabilities. As he prepared, Malcolm allowed himself the briefest reflection on how thoroughly this confrontation had been shaped by his own professional decisions. The cabin's design had anticipated external threats, but failed to account for psychological exploitation of his deepest personal vulnerability, a tactical error he would not repeat. Above, the occupying team continued securing the property, unaware that the true threat now operated beneath them, preparing a counteroffensive that would rewrite all operational parameters. Malcolm Reed had spent decades weaponizing environments against adversaries. Now he would weaponize himself. Carmen Vasquez sat in the back of an armored SUV, ice pack pressed against her bruised throat, rage simmering beneath her professional exterior. The operation had been compromised, her carefully constructed psychological manipulation reversed in seconds. Reed had not only escaped, but had appropriated her communications and credentials in the process. Opposite her sat Briggs, satellite phone, pressed to his ear, features grim as he received updated instructions from cartel leadership. Understood, he concluded, ending the call. We're being redirected. New priority objective. Reed? Carmen asked, voice still raspy from the tracheal. Strike. No. We're to secure the package immediately. Transport to the secondary location cancelled. Too much exposure risk. If Reed accesses your phone data, Carmen's expression darkened. The package, Sophia Reed, represented her operational leverage. The daughters he'd studied so thoroughly she could mimic her mannerisms, speech patterns, emotional responses. He's figured it out, she stated. Professional assessment overriding wounded pride. He'll be coming for her. Let him. Briggs replied coldly. We're consolidating security at the primary facility. Full tactical complement. If Reed approaches, we eliminate with prejudice. No more psychological games. Carmen shook her head. You still don't understand what we're dealing with. Reed isn't just another target. The CIO's him for operations so sensitive most of the intelligence community doesn't know they existed. He's one man, wounded, resource limited, against a fully equipped tactical team. That's exactly the scenario he's been trained for, Carmen insisted. You're thinking conventionally. Reed doesn't operate that way. Briggs's expression hardened. My team has handled high-value extraction and elimination for 15 years. Former intelligence, military, even your psychological warfare specialists. Reed is just another name on the list. Carmen recognized the futility of further argument. Briggs exemplified the tactical mindset, supremely effective within defined operational parameters, dangerously inflexible when confronting asymmetric threats. The convoy accelerated southward, toward the facility where Sophia Reed remained, sedated under armed guard. Carmen couldn't shake the growing certainty that they were driving precisely where Malcolm Reed wanted them to go. 200 miles south, Malcolm boarded a private helicopter. At an isolated airstrip, the pilot, a former CIA operative who owed Malcolm for extraction from a compromised operation in Chechnya, asked no questions about his passenger's condition or destination. As they lifted off, Malcolm continued preparations. Carmen's phone had yielded critical intelligence beyond Sophia's location. Complete personnel files for Briggs's tactical team, facility security protocols, even contingency plans for various scenarios. Everything except her own background. That conspicuous absence confirmed Malcolm's suspicion. Carmen Vasquez wasn't merely Gaza's psychological specialist. She was something far more significant, someone whose identity warranted extraordinary protection. The helicopter banked southward, racing toward the Mexican border. Malcolm used the 3-hour flight to finalize his approach. Direct confrontation remained non-viable, the facility's security too substantial for frontal assault. Instead, he would employ the central principle of advanced psychological warfare, reality reconfiguration, not merely manipulating perception, but fundamentally altering how targets processed and responded to their environment, creating a scenario where adversaries defeated themselves through predictable responses to unpredictable stimuli. The technique required extensive preparation under normal circumstances. Malcolm had less than 2 hours, compressed application with minimal resources against prepared opposition, the highest difficulty level of psychological operation, also, when executed correctly, the most devastatingly effective. Malcolm reviewed the intelligence again, identifying key personnel, analyzing psychological profiles, mapping decision trees. Every security system had vulnerabilities, not in technology or physical structures, but in the humans who operated them. Humans with fears, ambitions, doubts, conflicts. The helicopter approached Mexican airspace. Below, desert landscape stretched toward distant mountains. Somewhere ahead lay the facility holding Sophia. Malcolm allowed himself momentary focus on the personal stakes. His daughter, whom he'd failed through years of professional prioritization, now endangered because of his work. The emotion threatened to cloud tactical judgment. Malcolm acknowledged it, then compartmentalized. Psychological discipline, the same techniques he'd taught interrogation subjects for withstanding pressure. The pilot spoke through the headset. Approaching northern checkpoint, countermeasures active. Malcolm nodded. Specialized equipment on board would mask their approach from standard detection systems. Low-altitude flight path would exploit terrain features for additional concealment. 30 minutes to drop zone, the pilot added. Malcolm made final equipment checks. The specialized devices from his contingency armory had been supplemented with conventional tactical gear, sufficient for initial approach. The true weapons, however, weren't physical. Information, understanding, psychological leverage. He reviewed the facility's personnel one final time. Security Director Ramirez, former Mexican Special Forces, disciplined, but with corruption allegations in his military file. Psychological profile indicated strong self-preservation, instinct, overriding loyalty when sufficiently pressured. Chief Medical Officer Navarro, respected neurologist whose gambling debts had forced cooperation with cartel operations. Moral conflict, evident in prescription patterns. Minimizing sedative dosages whenever possible. Head of Internal Security Torres. True believer in cartel hierarchy, but with significant rivalry against Briggs's external tactical team. Territorial responses well documented in operational incidents. Each represented a potential fracture point. Applied pressure to these psychological fault lines could cascade through the entire security structure. Carmen had employed Malcolm's own methods against him, exploiting his deepest vulnerability, his daughter. Now he would demonstrate why the student should fear the master's response. The helicopter began its descent toward the drop zone, a concealed ravine 3 miles from the target facility. As Malcolm prepared to disembark, the pilot handed him a satellite phone. Secure line, he explained, if you need extraction. Malcolm accepted the device with a nod of thanks. Maintain position for 12 hours. After that, assume operation compromised. Understood. The pilot hesitated. This personal for you? Yes. Then good hunting. The helicopter touched down, rotors maintaining minimum speed for rapid departure. Malcolm moved with practiced efficiency, despite his injured shoulder. Equipment secured. Mind focused. In the distance, the medical facility's perimeter lights glowed against the darkening sky. Somewhere inside, his daughter remained captive. Between them stood a security force, specifically briefed on his methods, prepared for his approach. They believed themselves ready for Dr. Malcolm Reed, the CIA's former psychological warfare specialist. They would soon discover how profound their miscalculation had been. Darkness had settled over the medical facility, a sprawling compound nestled against the foothills 30 miles outside Guadalajara. 3 concentric security layers protected the central building. Perimeter fencing with motion sensors, roving guard patrols with trained dogs, and interior security stations with biometric access controls. Inside the facility's east wing, Sophia Reed lay unconscious in a monitored room, IV drips maintaining sedation levels, 2 guards stationed outside her door, another 4 positioned at corridor junctions. Medical staff periodically checked vital signs, adjusting medications as needed. In the Security Command Center, Ramirez surveyed camera feeds with growing tension. Briggs's tactical team had arrived 90 minutes earlier, integrating with existing security. Carmen had sequestered herself in the administrative office, coordinating directly with Garza's representatives. Perimeter status, Ramirez demanded. All sectors secure, his subordinate confirmed. Additional motion sensors deployed at northern approaches, thermal imaging active on all quadrants. Ramirez nodded, but unease persisted. Something about the operation felt wrong. Rushed protocols, conflicting instructions between Carmen and Briggs. The power dynamics had shifted after Reed's escape. Tension crackling between the psychological specialist and tactical commander. "Sir," another security officer called. "Vehicle approaching main gate. Medical transport. Not on schedule." Ramirez moved to the monitor. "Standard ambulance. Proper credentials displayed. Verify authorization." The officer made the call. Then reported, "Central dispatch confirms transfer patient from regional hospital. Authorization code checks out." "Run secondary verification," Ramirez ordered, instinct triggering caution. Before the officer could comply, Carmen's voice came through. His earpiece. "Let them through. Expected medical consult for the package." Ramirez hesitated. "Procedural violation. Secondary verification was standard protocol." "Immediately, Ramirez," Carmen added, voice tight with authority. "Open the gate," he ordered reluctantly. Something was definitely wrong. The ambulance proceeded through the primary checkpoint. Medical credentials scanned. Vehicle undercarriage examined. Everything appeared in order. Yet Ramirez's unease intensified. He dispatched additional personnel to the medical receiving area as the ambulance approached. Inside the vehicle, 2 paramedics and a doctor in standard medical attire maintained professional composure as security protocols were completed. Their credentials, perfect forgeries created using data from Carmen's phone, passed initial inspection. What the security team couldn't detect was that beneath the lead paramedic's uniform was Malcolm Reed. Facial features altered through specialized, CIA-developed prosthetics, posture, and movement patterns completely transformed. The ambulance reached the facility's medical entrance. Security personnel approached as the rear doors opened. The doctor stepped out first, presenting credentials. "Patient transfer from regional," he explained. "Critical neurological consult." Guards inspected the ambulance interior, where an elderly patient lay connected to monitoring equipment. Nothing unusual registered. Just another Cartel VIP requiring specialized medical attention away from public facilities. "Proceed to intake," the guard directed. "Security escort required." Malcolm maintained his paramedic persona with perfect discipline as they wheeled the patient through security checkpoints. Every movement, every response calculated to project medical professionalism while gathering critical intelligence, personnel, positions, security protocols, communications patterns. The first phase of his approach had succeeded. Infiltration complete. In the ambulance's oxygen tanks, specialized compounds had been substituted. Undetectable mixtures that would vaporize through the facility's air handling system. Not harmful, but precisely calibrated to induce specific cognitive effects when combined with the second compound, already introduced through the patient's IV line. As they reached the intake area, Malcolm activated the sequence. Within minutes, microscopic particulates would begin circulating throughout the facility's ventilation system. Dr. Navarro, the chief medical officer, greeted the transfer team with evident fatigue. Malcolm observed the physician's body language. Clinical detachment undermined by moral discomfort. Psychological assessment, exploitable confliction. Patient status? Navarro inquired. Stable but critical, Malcolm's doctor colleague responded. Advanced neurological compromise requiring specialist evaluation. The technical description served 2 purposes: establishing medical credibility while subtly reminding Navarro of his ethical obligations as a physician. "Take them to evaluation room 3, Navarro instructed staff. "Full workup protocol." Malcolm noted Navarro's deliberate avoidance of the East Wing where Sophia was held. Compartmentalization, keeping legitimate medical activities separated from cartel operations. Another vulnerability. As they wheeled the patient to the designated room, Malcolm continued environmental assessment. 18 security personnel visible so far. Weapons distribution consistent with site protocols from Carmen's files. Communications on predicted frequencies. Most importantly, facility layout matching intelligence extracted from personnel files. 3 possible routes to the East Wing, each with specific security challenges. ID scan required, a guard announced as they reached a security checkpoint between sections. Standard procedure, potentially compromising the entire operation if Malcolm's forged credentials failed deeper inspection. Before the scanner could be activated, emergency strobes flashed throughout the corridor. Alarm protocol initiated. Security breach in North Perimeter, announced the facility-wide system. All personnel to designated response positions. The guards hesitated. Protocols conflicting. Maintain position or respond to breach. Malcolm observed their uncertainty with clinical satisfaction. The timing was precise. Coordinated through remote activation of the device she'd planted at the north fence line 20 minutes earlier. Go, the lead guard told his partner. I'll process these 3 and join you. Perfect. Response. Exactly as Malcolm had predicted when mapping security psychological profiles. Under pressure, personnel reverted to standard tactical reactions. As the lone guard turned his attention to the credential scanner, Malcolm executed a precise strike to the vagus nerve cluster at the base of the skull. The guard collapsed without a sound, unconscious but unharmed. Malcolm secured the guard's weapon and access card, signaling his colleagues. The doctor retrieved a specialized package from beneath the patient gurney, while the second paramedic secured the unconscious guard. No verbal communication needed. The operation had been precisely choreographed during the approach. Each team member understood their role in the psychological warfare operation about to unfold. Malcolm activated the guard's radio, monitoring security chatter. The North Perimeter breach was creating exactly their response pattern anticipated. Forces diverted, attentional resources fragmented, command structure strained. Phase 1 complete. Infiltration successful. Phase 2. Systemic destabilization. Malcolm accessed the nearest environmental control panel using the guard's security credentials. The specialized compounds were now circulating throughout the facility's ventilation system, ready for activation. He entered the trigger sequence, a specific pattern of temperature and air pressure modulations that would catalyze the suspended compounds. The effects would manifest gradually, subtle cognitive changes rather than obvious impairment. Security personnel would experience increased paranoia, diminished trust in colleagues, heightened sensitivity to hierarchical conflicts. Not enough to create obvious impairment, but sufficient to exploit existing organizational tensions, particularly the documented rivalry between Ramirez's internal security and Briggs' tactical team. Malcolm moved toward the East Wing, medical disguise allowing reasonable freedom of movement during the security alert. His 2 colleagues separated as planned, moving to secondary objectives: communications disruption and monitoring system infiltration. In the security command center, Ramirez struggled to coordinate response to the perimeter breach. Thermal imaging showed nothing at the fence line, yet sensors continued reporting movement. Equipment malfunction or sophisticated penetration attempt. Deploy additional teams to sectors 7 and 9, he ordered. Full sweeping pattern. Belay that, came Briggs's voice as the tactical commander entered the center. My team has primary perimeter responsibility. Your personnel maintain interior positions. Ramirez bristled at the jurisdictional encroachment. This is my facility. Security protocols are my purview. Not anymore, Briggs countered. Direct orders from Gaza. External threats are my domain. The conflict represented exactly the psychological fault line Malcolm had identified. Territorial response patterns, authority challenges, professional pride, all amplified by the compounds now circulating through the facility's air handling system. In the administrative office, Carmen observed the security feed with growing concern. Something felt wrong about the breach pattern. Too convenient, too perfectly timed to fragment response. Status on the package, she demanded through her comm. Security maintained, came the response from the East Wing. No approach attempts. Carmen wasn't reassured. If Reed had truly identified his daughter's location, he wouldn't waste resources on perimeter distractions, unless understanding dawned with chilling clarity. Full lockdown, she commanded. All medical personnel verify immediately. We have potential infiltration already inside. Too late. Throughout the facility, Malcolm's psychological operation was already undermining command coherence. Ramirez and Briggs continued jurisdictional arguments. Security teams received conflicting instructions. Trust degrading exactly as designed. Malcolm reached the East Wing access point, medical credentials, and appropriated security ID, creating plausible authorization. The guards stationed at the checkpoint appeared increasingly agitated, subtle effect of the compounds combined with the conflicting security alerts. Medical team for patient evaluation, Malcolm explained, presenting credentials. The guard hesitated, protocols competing with growing paranoia. No scheduled evaluations during security alert. Direct order from Dr. Navarro, Malcolm countered, presenting a falsified authorization. Critical medication adjustment cannot be delayed. When psychological preparation is perfect, minimal pressure yields maximum effect. The guard's resistance crumbled against the weight of medical authority combined with his own chemically enhanced uncertainty. Proceed, he granted, scanning Malcolm's forged credentials. Inside the East Wing, Malcolm moved with practiced efficiency, monitoring the operation's cascading effects through the security communications he now accessed. Throughout the facility, precisely engineered confusion spread. Security personnel questioning each other's authority, medical staff requesting clarification on protocols, command structure fracturing along predictable fault lines. 2 guards remained outside Sophia's room, alert, weapons ready. Direct confrontation would create unacceptable risk. Malcolm activated the next phase. Through his earpiece came confirmation from his colleague who had infiltrated the monitoring systems. Ready? On your mark. Execute, Malcolm confirmed softly. Throughout the facility, emergency systems activated simultaneously. Fire alarms, oxygen warnings, security breaches on multiple levels. Not actual emergencies, but perfect simulation through compromised monitoring. Systems.protocol dictated immediate evacuation of non-essential personnel from affected sectors. The guards outside Sophia's room received conflicting instructions. Maintain position per Carmen's standing orders versus evacuate per facility. Emergency protocols. Malcolm observed their hesitation from concealment, noting micro-expressions indicating escalating stress. When their attention focused momentarily on emergency communications, he made his approach, not as a threat, but as a solution to their uncertainty. Medical evacuation team, he announced authoritatively. Priority patient transfer, ordered by command. The senior guard's resistance was weakening, but training maintained protocol adherence. No authorization received. Malcolm presented the falsified evacuation order, perfect replica of official documentation. Fire suppression systems activated in adjacent sectors. Oxygen compromise imminent. Patient safety protocols supersede security standing orders. The psychological groundwork, combined with the apparent emergency, created perfect cognitive pressure. The guard's resistance collapsed under the weight of competing priorities. Protect the asset versus ensure patient safety. Proceed, the senior guard conceded, unlocking the door. Inside, Sophia lay unconscious on a medical bed, monitoring equipment tracking vital signs. Malcolm maintained his professional persona while conducting rapid medical assessment. IV sedation. Stable vital signs. No apparent physical trauma. He administered the counteragent to the sedatives, carefully calculated to restore consciousness without shock. As he prepared for transport, the facility's degrading security situation accelerated. Alarms continuing. Communication channels overwhelmed with conflicting information. In the command center, complete breakdown had occurred. Ramirez and Briggs, now openly hostile. Security teams fragmented along loyalty lines. Carmen fought to restore order. But the psychological operation had achieved critical mass. Self-sustaining confusion that would require complete system reset to resolve. All units verify position, Carmen demanded through master communications. Unknown infiltrators confirmed inside facility. Priority target is East Wing Medical. Too late. Malcolm had already secured Sophia on a transport gurney, medical credentials providing plausible authorization for movement. His colleagues had neutralized key monitoring systems, replacing camera feeds with looped footage showing an empty room. As they approached the medical evacuation point, Sophia began regaining consciousness, the critical vulnerability in Malcolm's extraction plan. If she reacted to him with recognition, the entire psychological operation would collapse. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion evident as awareness returned. She focused on Malcolm's face, the prosthetic alterations concealing his identity from security, but not from his daughter. Recognition dawned in her expression. Before she could speak, Malcolm leaned close, voice barely audible. Security operation. Your life depends on silence. Years of estrangement battled with primal recognition. Malcolm watched the conflict play across her features. Distrust warring, with desperate hope. Dad, she whispered, In that moment, the facility's emergency lights failed, the final stage of Malcolm's systematic infrastructure degradation. Backup generators engaged, casting the corridors in dim red emergency lighting. "Trust me now," Malcolm urged. Explanations later. Somewhere in the facility, gunfire erupted, Briggs' tactical team engaging with internal security as psychological pressure finally triggered open conflict. Carmen's voice echoed through emergency channels, attempting to restore order to completely compromised command structures. Malcolm continued the extraction, moving with practiced efficiency toward the medical transport still waiting at the intake area. His colleagues maintained their cover identities, smooth professionalism never wavering despite the facility's descent into chaos. As they reached the ambulance, the final confrontation materialized. Carmen Vasquez emerged from an adjacent corridor, weapon raised, expression cold with fury and grudging respect. "Remarkable performance, Dr. Reed," she acknowledged. "Truly masterful application of your methodologies." Malcolm positioned himself, between Carmen and the gurney holding Sophia. "You studied my techniques," he replied calmly, "but not their philosophical foundation, which is, psychological warfare isn't about destroying minds," Malcolm explained. "It's about creating choice architectures that make certain decisions inevitable." Carmen's weapon remained steady. "And what decision have you made inevitable for me?" Malcolm smiled slightly. "The recognition that killing me guarantees your own destruction." Before Carmen could respond, Sophia spoke from the gurney, voice weak but determined. "He rigged the compounds, didn't he? You're already compromised." Carmen's expression flickered with uncertainty. Phase 2. Activation was 37 minutes. "Go," Malcolm confirmed. "Neural binding complete, targeting parameters established. If I don't transmit the countermeasure protocol within the next hour, irreversible cognitive cascade begins." The perfect bluff, completely fabricated, but constructed from technical components Carmen recognized from classified research. The doubt registered in her eyes, the possibility too significant to dismiss. "You're lying," she stated, but without conviction. "Psychological warfare specialist," Malcolm reminded her. "This is what I do." Behind Carmen, Malcolm glimpsed movement, Briggs approaching with 2 tactical operators, weapons ready. The game's final move. Malcolm triggered the last sequence on the device concealed in his paramedic uniform. Throughout the facility, all communications simultaneously broadcast a specific audio pattern, specialized frequencies designed to interact with the compounds now circulating in everyone's bloodstream. Not harmful, but immediately disorienting. 30 seconds of perceptual disruption causing temporary loss of coordination and focus. Carmen staggered, weapon lowering involuntarily. Briggs and his team similarly affected. Malcolm seized the opportunity, completing Sophia's transfer to the ambulance. His colleagues secured the vehicle as Malcolm administered a mild sedative to Carmen, enough to ensure she couldn't pursue immediately but nothing that would cause permanent harm. "When you wake," he told her professionally, "remember that I could have killed you and everyone here. Remember that when deciding whether to continue this operation." As the ambulance departed through the chaotic facility, security too compromised to mount effective resistance, Malcolm finally allowed himself to focus fully on his daughter. Sophia stared at him, emotions warring across her features. Confusion, fear, anger, and beneath it all, the faintest glimmer of something he hadn't seen in decades. "Trust. I don't understand any of this," she whispered. "I know," Malcolm acknowledged, removing the prosthetics that had altered his appearance. "And I owe you explanations for everything. Not just today, for all of it." The ambulance accelerated toward the extraction point where the helicopter waited. Behind them, the facility's security continued unraveling, a masterclass in psychological system collapse that would require days to fully resolve. Malcolm had accomplished the impossible, infiltrating a heavily secured facility, neutralizing, prepared opposition, and extracting a high-value asset without inflicting a single casualty. Not through violence, but through perfect understanding of human psychological architecture. "Why now?" Sophia asked, the question encompassing decades of absence. Malcolm met his daughter's gaze directly. "Because some things matter more than duty." For the first time in his career, Dr. Malcolm Reed had deployed his full capabilities for a purely personal mission, and discovered something he'd forgotten during 18 years of psychological warfare operations. Some bonds couldn't be broken, even by time and betrayal. The helicopter cut through darkness over the northern Mexican desert, rotors thundering against the night sky. Inside, Malcolm tended to Sophia, monitoring vital signs as sedatives cleared from her system. His medical colleagues, former CIA operatives who owed him their lives from past operations, maintained professional focus, saying nothing of the emotional undercurrents evident between father and daughter. "How are you feeling?" Malcolm asked, genuine concern replacing the clinical detachment that had defined his professional life. Sophia studied him, still processing the impossible sequence of events. "Like I'm hallucinating," she answered finally. "One minute I'm in my apartment in Bogotá. The next I'm waking up in some facility with you dressed as a paramedic staging a rescue mission. Cognitive disorientation is normal after prolonged sedation," Malcolm explained, then caught himself slipping into clinical language. "I'm sorry. This is challenging for me too. What happened? Who were those people?" Malcolm considered how much to share. 20 years of operational security instincts battled with the recognition that his daughter deserved complete truth. "Alejandro Garza," he began. "Cartel leader I testified against. He targeted you to get to me." "Why me? We haven't spoken in years." Pain edged her voice. "You made your choices very clear." Malcolm accepted the accusation without defense. "They identified you as my vulnerability. Despite the estrangement, they correctly assessed that threatening you would compromise my judgment." "They were right," Sophia observed. "Yes, no qualification, no justification. The simple acknowledgement hung between them, more powerful than any elaborate explanation. "Where are we going?" she asked after a moment. "Secure location in Arizona. Former agency safe. House off official records." Sophia processed this. And then what? Witness protection. New identities. Malcolm shook his head. "That's not necessary." Garza's operation failed comprehensively. Sending a psychological warfare specialist against their primary strategic asset was tactically unsound. "Carmen?" Sophia asked. "The woman who looked like me?" Malcolm nodded. "She studied your mannerisms, speech patterns, personal history, surgical modifications to approximate your appearance. Sophisticated psychological operation. She must have been watching me for months." Sophia shuddered. "Likely longer," Malcolm confirmed. "Her preparation was thorough." Sophia hesitated, then asked the question that truly mattered. "What happened between you and Mom?" "She never explained, not really. Just said you chose your work over us." The helicopter banked northward, border crossing imminent. Malcolm checked their position on the GPS, buying seconds before answering. The official explanation was, "National security priorities," he began carefully. "Psychological warfare expertise in high demand after 9/11. Critical operations requiring my specific skills." And the unofficial explanation. Malcolm met his daughter's gaze directly. "I was afraid." "Of what?" "Of failing you both. The work I did, it changes you. Breaks something essential." Malcolm looked away. Words difficult after decades of professional emotional discipline. "I thought separation protected you from what I was becoming." "That wasn't your choice to make," Sophia said, anger flaring briefly. "We needed you, not protection." "I know that now," Malcolm acknowledged. The recognition came too late. Silence stretched between them, weighted with 20 years of absence. Below, the landscape changed as they crossed into Arizona airspace. "Your mother never stopped loving you," Sophia said finally. "Even at the end." Malcolm's composed exterior cracked slightly. "She told you that?" "Not directly, but she kept everything. Your letters, research papers, news clippings whenever your work was mentioned obliquely in some classified context." Sophia hesitated. She understood why you stayed away, even if she couldn't forgive it. The revelation struck deeper than anything Malcolm had faced during the night's operation. Eleanor had understood, had perhaps even seen what he couldn't, that his absence had been form of misguided protection rather than abandonment. "What I found in her papers," Sophia continued, "was a letter she never sent, talking about how your work had saved thousands of lives, even if it cost you your family. She was proud of you, in her way." Malcolm struggled to maintain composure, psychological discipline, faltering against personal revelation. "I didn't deserve that understanding," he said finally. "Probably not," Sophia agreed with unexpected gentleness, "but she gave it anyway." The helicopter began descent toward a remote landing site, isolated property visible only as scattered lights against desert darkness. Malcolm secured equipment, professional focus returning as operational concerns reasserted themselves. "We'll be safe here temporarily," he explained. "I have colleagues arranging more permanent security measures against any further attempts." "And Garza?" Sophia asked. "His operational capacity has been severely compromised. The facility infiltration exposed multiple security vulnerabilities within his organization. More importantly, he now understands the consequences of targeting you." "You made sure of that," Sophia observed. "Yes, Malcolm's tone left no doubt about the message delivered as the helicopter touched down, rotors slowing. Sophia asked the question that would define everything that followed. What happens after this, between us? Malcolm considered the question with the same analytical thoroughness he'd applied to operational challenges throughout his career. The professional answer was clear. Maintain distance, ensure her security. Through indirect measures, preserve operational separation. Instead, he chose truth. I don't know, he admitted. I missed 20 years of your life. I have no right to expect forgiveness or connection. But if you're willing, I'd like the chance to know my daughter. The helicopter settled on the landing pad, engines powering down. Malcolm's colleagues disembarked first, securing the perimeter with practiced efficiency. I'm not sure I'm ready to forgive you, Sophia said as they prepared to exit. But I'd like to understand. Maybe that's a place to start. Malcolm nodded, accepting the limited opening for what it was. More than he deserved, less than he hoped for. A beginning rather than resolution. Outside, the Arizona night spread vast and clear, stars emerging against perfect darkness. Malcolm helped Sophia from the helicopter, supporting her still unsteady steps. For the first time in decades, Dr. Malcolm Reed, the CIA's preeminent psychological warfare specialist who had broken the world's most hardened terrorists, confronted a challenge no training had prepared him for, reconnecting with the daughter, whose life had continued without him. It would require different skills than those that had defined his professional identity. Vulnerability instead of control, truth instead of strategic disclosure, acceptance of judgment rather than manipulation of perception. As they walked toward the safe house, Malcolm realized that the most challenging psychological operation of his life was just beginning. 3 months later, Malcolm stood at the window of a Georgetown apartment, watching morning light spill across the Potomac. Behind him, preparations for the grand jury testimony continued. Federal prosecutors reviewing key points, Justice Department officials securing final procedural details. The Gaza case had evolved beyond cartel prosecution into a sprawling investigation of corruption within American intelligence services. Sarah Chen's betrayal had exposed a network of compromised officials, their complicity in cartel operations stretching back decades. Malcolm's testimony would be the centerpiece, delivered behind closed doors, details classified at the highest levels, but consequences reverberating throughout North American intelligence communities. Dr. Reed, a young Justice Department attorney, approached respectfully. They're ready for your final preparation session. Malcolm nodded, turning from the window. The shoulder wound had healed, leaving another scar among many, physical reminders of a life defined by shadows and hard choices. Has my daughter arrived? He asked. Yes, sir. She's in the secure waiting area. Something loosened in Malcolm's chest. Tension he'd carried since Wyoming. Despite their cautious reconnection over recent months, part of him still expected Sophia to disappear again, the fragile bridge between them collapsing under the weight of history. The attorney led him through corridors of the secure facility, security personnel nodding with solemn respect. Malcolm's reputation had transformed since the Mexican operation. The analytical legend who had neutralized an entire cartel security apparatus without casualties, not for national security, but for family. In the preparation room, federal prosecutors waited with classified files and testimony outlines. Malcolm would address them shortly. First, he needed 5 minutes with the person who mattered most. Sophia stood as he entered the private waiting area, her expression guarded but without the coldness that had defined their interactions for decades. 3 months of careful conversations had established a tentative connection, not forgiveness, exactly, but understanding. You ready for this? She asked. The testimony? Yes. Malcolm smiled slightly. The part where my daughter watches me reveal classified operations I've denied. Involvement with for 20 years? Less certain. I've signed enough non-disclosure agreements to wallpaper the Pentagon, Sophia replied with a hint of her mother's dry humor. Besides, I think we're past secrets, don't you? Malcolm nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke. Their reconnection had progressed through painful honesty. His acknowledgement of professional priorities that had decimated their family, her recognition of how she'd clung to childhood anger rather than accepting the complex reality of his work. Have you heard anything about Carmen? Sophia asked, moving to stand beside him at the window. Disappeared after Mexico, Malcolm answered. Gaza's organization in disarray, factional conflicts escalating. She's too valuable an asset to eliminate, too compromised to trust. You almost sound concerned for her. Professional respect, Malcolm clarified. She nearly succeeded against significant odds. Sophia studied him, seeing beyond practice composure to the contemplation beneath. But that's not what's really on your mind today, is it? Malcolm smiled faintly. Sophia had inherited his perceptual acuity, applied with her mother's emotional intelligence. A formidable combination. I received Carmen's psychological assessment this morning, he admitted. Compiled from operational data and facility records, recovered during Justice Department raids. And? She wasn't just Gaza's psychological warfare specialist. She was his creation, identified as a child for specific cognitive attributes, education directed towards psychological operations, development shaped entirely around weaponizing her perceptual abilities. Understanding dawned in Sophia's expression. Like what could have happened to you at the CIA if you'd surrendered completely to the work? Yes. Malcolm turned from the window, facing his daughter directly. The path I feared most, becoming nothing but my function. Losing everything human in service to methodology. Is that why you left us? Sophia asked quietly. Fear of becoming like her. I left because I believed separation protected you from what my work required me to become, Malcolm answered carefully. I was wrong about the method, but the concern was genuine. Carmen's existence validates that fear, if not my response to it. Sophia considered this, the last piece of a puzzle she'd been assembling since their reunion. You could have explained this to Mom. Eleanor understood psychological operations better than anyone outside the field, Malcolm acknowledged. She would have recognized the transformation happening within me. That's precisely why I couldn't face her. She would have helped you. I know that now. The simple admission carried the weight of decades of regret. A gentle knock interrupted. Them. The Justice Department attorney signaling that final preparations couldn't wait any longer. I need to complete the testimony review, Malcolm said. You don't have to stay. I'll be here, Sophia assured him. Someone should witness who you really are, not just what you did. The statement held more healing than any explicit forgiveness could have offered. Malcolm nodded, unable to find adequate words. As he turned to leave, Sophia spoke once more. Dad? The term still startled him, a designation he'd surrendered any right to decades earlier. Carmen failed because she studied your methods but missed something fundamental. What was it? Malcolm considered the question with professional and personal insight. She approached psychological warfare as methodology, technical application of pressure to predictable vulnerability. And you don't, not anymore. Malcolm smiled slightly. The most effective psychological operations aren't about creating weakness, but recognizing strength, not exploiting fear, but understanding courage. Is that what you'll teach at Georgetown? Sophia asked. I saw the lecture offer on your desk earlier. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. Going through my papers. Professional hazard in our family, apparently. This drew a genuine laugh. Elena's laugh. The sound created an ache of memory and hope simultaneously. I haven't decided about teaching, Malcolm admitted. There are other priorities now. The implication hung between them. Tentative but real. The possibility of connection more valuable than professional legacy or institutional knowledge. Go finish your preparation, Sophia said. I'll be here when you're done. As Malcolm walked toward the room where prosecutors waited with their questions about cartels and corruption, psychological operations and compromised agents, he carried something he'd abandoned decades earlier. Not just purpose, which had driven him through years of classified operations. Not just expertise, which had made him legendary within intelligence communities. Something far more valuable, yet infinitely more fragile. Hope. In a remote cabin on Wyoming's forgotten borderlands, 6 cartel assassins had breached reinforced doors with surgical precision, weapons drawn for what should have been a simple elimination. Instead, they had triggered the beginning of Dr. Malcolm Reed's most important psychological operation, not breaking a subject, but rebuilding himself. The most dangerous weapon in any room is a prepared mind, but the most powerful force in any life is a mind that understands what